All right, folks, we are now live on HHTV. We may begin.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar on governance here at Horizon House. This is a beautiful day, and I thank you for being with us. I'm sure it's tempting to be outside, and I hope you get a chance to enjoy it later today if you haven't been out already. My name is Anne Brand. I'm a 13-year resident here at Horizon House, and I'm currently on the Board of Trustees and serving as its president. I'm delighted that we have with us today for this webinar two very distinguished attorneys, lawyers, and residents here at Horizon House. We will begin with Ned Lange. Ned has been at Horizon House as long as I have, 13 years, I think, this year. He has been on the Board of Trustees for the maximum number of years you can serve consecutively, that's 11. And during much of that time, he has been chair of the governance committee here at Horizon House and knows the system through and through and adds that to his experience in law. And we're just delighted that he has agreed to do this. Also joining him today is Bill Andersen. I think Bill has been here about 10 years. I'm not quite sure, but I think that's right, Bill and Mary Ann. He has a distinguished and 40+ year career teaching law, primarily at the University of Washington, but also worldwide. These two gentlemen have presented this material to our residents periodically during the years we've been together. And it's been some time since we've been able to do it for all the circumstances we are all so familiar with. So it's wonderful to have them here to make this presentation today. Just two bits of housekeeping. Since this is a webinar, you have the opportunity to ask questions of our distinguished panel. To do so, you can put your hand by your face and one of our wonderful hosts will see you and be able to acknowledge you. And the other thing you can do is use the chat function on your screen. It's your choice, and we welcome questions from you. I also want to thank Ginny Stimson and Risa Ransom for their technical and psychological support as we prepared for this webinar. Okay, Ned, take it away.
Thank you, Anne. This first slide gives a governance definition and what we will be talking about. I suppose some people might simply shorten it to say, who calls the shots around here? Next. Next, there are two separate corporations that govern Horizon House. The Board of Trustees, which provides the services in the building and so forth, and the Resident Council. So governance is not a completely simple thing. And to explain the relationship between the twos in a brief introduction, I will turn this now over to Bill Andersen.
Next. All right, if we could have the next screen, please. Good. As Ned says, this is a rather complicated governance picture because we have two separate organizations which are in some senses independent, but they obviously have to be related to each other. So this graphic, which I'm about to display, would give you a clue anyway in general terms of how these two organizations work together to produce governance at Horizon House. Next screen, please. In any governance setting, what you're trying to do is to accomplish certain policies. And the kind of policies, this is not a complete list, but it's a suggestion of the sorts of things the policymakers have to consider. When I first moved here, I assumed that the policymakers were mostly concerned with what's in that left box up there. That is, they were concerned with me. What policies would I like? What policies would serve me better? What policies would fit my expectations best? As I began to think about it, and as I got into the role with council work and a term on the board itself, I realized that the board has a much broader range of things they have to consider. For example, they have to consider future residents. If they don't take account of the needs and the preferences of the people in the future in their designs and their structures and their processes, nobody may come here in the future, in which case we're in bad shape. So they have to consider the future residents. They also have to consider staff matters, how much they're paid, how fairly they're treated, how their work is assigned, and so on, which is a major consideration which bears on the management here. Then there's a set of goals and values, and when Ned talks to us about the board, he will tell us something about the different goals and values that the Board of Trustees also has to do. They have to be good neighbors. They have to be good citizens of the city. We have to be things other than merely housing for us residents. So those goals and values are part of the policy considerations that the board has to consider. And of course, fiscal soundness is something that the board always has to be concerned about. It might serve current residents now if we engaged in some major reconstruction and providing swimming pools in every apartment, but obviously that's not going to be within the realm of fiscal possibility. So watching that whole series of complicated events is one of their goals, and there are many others. Can I see the next slide, please? What this graphic suggests is that most of that policy making and the discussions and debates about policies take place at the board level, and it is the board's responsibility, as Ned will suggest, to make those policies. One of the things they do, if the next slide, please, one of the things they do is hire some help. And they hire an executive director, and the executive director hires staff. And through those people, the actual work gets done of operating the system. Next slide, please. What the executive staff basically does, excuse me, is to provide the facilities, the apartments, the dining room, the library, the mechanical facilities, and all the other things that make it possible for us to be here. And so that's basically what the operations level looks like. Now, you might stop there and say, well, that's really all that is involved in governance. But it turns out that in many of these CCRCs, they're called, continuing care organizations, there are a number of activities that have to take place. And sometimes that's done by the executive staff. In many CCRCs around the state and around the country, there will be somebody on the executive staff called activities director and so on. And that person will design and provide various activities in the way of games and entertainment and so on. But here, it's not that way. Let's look at the next slide. What happens is the residence council, and the next slide, the residence council is created by the residents, elected by the residents, and they are the people who design and operate and fund all the activities that take place here, the concerts, the recitals, the lectures, the forums, the entertainments, whatever they are, all handled by the residence council. And we'll talk a little bit later about how that council itself is selected and governed. But now this picture, as you see it, is not particularly unusual. It is, I think, probably we have more residents' involvement in the provision of activities here than many CCRCs around the state. There are about 20 organizations like ours in the state of Washington and several hundred in the country. But what's really peculiar, not the wrong word, what's really singular about the Horizon House governance is what's on this next slide. And that suggests to you that the residents are very active at the board level. Up to 1/3 of the board may be actual residents, full voting members with regular terms of office on the board. So the residents are not down at the bottom of the stack. They are involved very much at the top of this organizational chart. And not only are there residents serving on the board, but there are many, many residents, and Ned will identify some of those later, who serve on board committees as full voting members of those committees. And so the residents are very much involved in the work of the board. And I think that makes this place quite distinctive. As I've talked to people in other CCRCs around the state and more broadly, we have a very resident-driven enterprise here, and the governance is, I think, most unusual. When you go to a national convention, sent me off to one when I was president of the council. And I met with, hundreds of other folks running these things around the country, and they were all shocked when I told them that, our board was made up a third of the residents, and the residents, all voting members, and residents served on as voting members of board committees and so on. That is not a very common practice around the country. So we have some special arrangement here that makes this resident-centered, resident-focused, resident-driven enterprise. And I think that's something that is important. The last slide of this graphic, we can see it now, also suggests that we have an attitude, I guess, as I'd say, about how we relate to the executive staff. Since I've been here about 10 years, I've seen Bob Andersen as CEO, and then Sarah McVeigh as CEO, and now Mike. All of them have share this notion that they have an open door policy. Residents can walk in, can call, can email, and talk to them about issues and questions. And so there's a lot more executive resident interchange here at a real level than I think you probably tend to find at other kind of places. So that's basically what the governance structure looks like in general. Now let's talk a little bit about the board, how it's composed. Ned's going to do that, and then I'll come back a little later and we'll talk about the governance structure of the Residents' Council. Okay, Ned?
Thanks, Bill. Next slide. This is an organizational chart that has had a significant change in the last 3 years. If you'll note, off to the left of the Board of Trustees is the Pacific Northwest Conference of the United Church of Christ. And that box used to be at the very top of the chart, but there were changes made at the request of the conference. A little bit of history. The conference organized and founded Horizon House a little over 50 years ago. Up until 2018, the conference elected the full board of trustees except for the resident council president. At the request of the board, that was changed. The practice became that the board nominated the trustees and forwarded them to the conference for approval and election. And the conference minister said, this has become too much of a formality, number one. Number two, we really aren't fully qualified to know what you need. So let's provide that you elect, i.e. the trustees elect themselves. And in addition to that, we also, the minister requested that he no longer be designated and serve as a non-voting member of the Board of Trustees. And that is what we have done. It continues that one member of the Board of Trustees, a full member voting, is designated by the conference of the United Church. Those changes were made at their request, and they really made reality, or legality, I should say, conform to reality. The conference continues to be the recipients of the assets of Horizon House, should it ever be dissolved and after all its liabilities are paid, but we doubt that that's a likely occurrence. And even though founded by the UCC, I think all of us would agree that it has been open. Horizon House has always been open to all faiths and persons, and has never been dominated or and never limited in its residence by the UCC. Turning to the Board of Trustees, the next slide, please. The bylaws provide for a membership of 10 to 15. Currently, the board is set at 12. One of those is the president of the resident council, elected by the residents. Another is the conference selectee that the UCC selects. The balance are selected by the existing board. The selection process is managed by the governance committee. It has to identify and cultivate and evaluate persons who would make good board members. They start by looking at what does the board need? Are there some specialties of talent that some persons may bring that we should not be without? And a primary consideration always, of course, is leadership ability. And we also seek diversity and inclusion. All the while, we seek people that are dedicated to our mission and willing to contribute to the continued success of Horizon House. Members are volunteers. There is no compensation whatsoever to our Board of Trustees at all. The governance committee always welcomes suggestions as to who may make valuable trustees. We appreciate the leadership quality, the experience, skills, and commitment to our mission. And the committee interviews the prospects and recommends and nominates them to the board, which then elects them. As far as tenure of the board, they are limited. Each term is 3 years, and a member is limited to three-year terms. If a member is selected to fill an unexpired term, they can serve out that unexpired term plus the full 3 years. Resident membership is limited to not more than a third of the membership of the full board. We always will at least have one member, and the other members beside the resident council, they are not what we would consider, quote, representatives of residents. They are selected for their other qualities. Residence is an incidental benefit, but they are not to be considered resident representatives. The board functions as a policy-making group. It does not deal with administration. It has to deal with long-range plans, strategies, hires and fires the executive director, and also basically looks to the continued success and future of Horizon House. Turning next to the next slide, these are the current members of the board. For your information, of course, a resident, Anne, who started this, is the not only resident and member of the board, but president. In addition, Jan Corriston is a resident, and Peter Shapiro, the president of the resident council, are the 3 members that are currently on the board. I would add that the board also has a kind of an indirect residency. Harold Zeit's parents are residents of Horizon House, so maybe we can consider him a half resident member. Turn to the next slide. In addition to the board basically does its works through standing committees. And these are the committees that are actively standing committees at this time: the Audit Committee, Community Relations, Executive, Finance, Governance, Philanthropy, and Strategic Planning. The names after those committees are the resident members of these committees. And you can see that in addition to having board membership, on the board committees, which do a major portion of the board's work, study and detailed analysis and so forth, there are a substantial number of residents who are continuing to be active and participate in these committees. And this is also a significant opportunity for resident input and membership. So with that, I think I'll conclude the formal presentation concerning the Board of Trustees of Horizon House itself. And now turn it over to Bill to explain the other corporation. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, next slide, please. The governance of the Residence Council is, as I said earlier, it's quite unusual, but in part because the residents have such a large role in managing the activities and the directives and the act that go on here. It's I'll speak in a minute about how these people are selected, but let's begin with the next slide, which shows you the officer structure of the council. There will be a president, there will be a secretary, be a treasurer, and the next slide will show that. Could I see the next slide, please? Vice presidents, one for programs, which is all the lectures and recitals and entertainments and stuff that go on, and one for administration of the council's own business. The next slide will show that each council member, of whom there are 15 currently, will be named a coordinator, basically, of some cluster of committees. And these are sort of abbreviations of categories here that may not be clear to everybody, but it's in environmental and education and entertainment and social and communications and so on. Each of those clusters of committees is under the auspices of one of the council coordinators. And the final slide on this business shows that the work is done by committees, and we are famous in the CCRC world for having more committees than anybody else. And it's because we have committees that run all these activities. And some of them are very complicated things, some of them are simpler, but we have every activity that takes place here in the way of a concert or an entertainment or a game or a lecture or whatever it is, will be under the auspices, virtually all of them will be under the auspices of a resident committee, which will be working with a coordinator to be sure that the committees have what they need in the way of resources and organizational permits to do what they want to do. So it's a very, I think, a smooth running operation and a very carefully controlled operation. Take a look at this chart and think, if you're a resident now, particularly if you're a new resident, understand that all these officers are other residents who've been selected and elected by residents. And if you have an interest in either committee work or in work as a coordinator or work as an executive in this enterprise way, you have opportunities to take a look at that. Let's look at the next slide. The council is currently, as I said, at 15 members. People serve 3-year terms. And so and the terms are staggered. So every year, 5 members of the council will reach the end of their term, and they are not able to serve a second term. Unlike the board members, this is a 3-year event, and then your term limited out, as they say in the political world. So every year there will be 5 new council members selected. The selection process is really an interesting one, I think, because it is quite open. There will be organizations, as I'm sure you all know, which is sort of an insider's game where people who are in select other people who are in, and the people who are in stay in all the time. That's deliberately not the case with this council. The selection process begins with the appointment of a nominating committee, and the nominating committee can have no more than 1 member who is a member of the existing council. So we're talking about, we just immediately start with people who are no longer members or who are not members of the residence council as the selection committee. Then an advertisement goes out to all residents, inviting them to submit their names or the names of other people they think would be good council members. And that collection is gathered. And then the nominating committee will go through that list, talk to all the names of the people who they've got, and make sure that the individuals are serious about wanting to be a member of the council. And then of those that are left, there will be intensive interviews of each of them by members of the nominating committee. And then the nominating committee will get together and decide which of the ones that they have in front of them and that they've interviewed will be recommended for the 5 openings that will appear every year. And sometimes often there are more than 5. So it's a question of choosing. And it's a hard decision. I've served on a couple of these committees, and it's not easy to select because all the people we get at that stage after the interviews are going to look like stunning council members, but you haven't got room for all of them. So you pick where the square holes are and the square pegs and the square holes are in terms of who's going off the council this year, and try and be sure you cover any major absences that you will notice. And that then produces a slate of 5 candidates, which is presented to the residents' population. And at the October meeting, if there are no nominations from the floor, which is entirely possible, it has happened, then the slate is selected. If there are nominations from the floor, then there will be a written ballot. Then residents will vote by written ballot for the 5 of the candidates that they have in front of them. So it's a very, I think, a fair and an elaborate process to be sure that we find everybody who is interested and qualified for this kind of stuff to be thoroughly looked at and then selected. I think it's a good process. The function of the council itself, and I would recommend you read the bylaws. I think you'd see that, incidentally, the bylaws are on HH Connect. You can find them there and read them, and it talks about the functions of the council, basically to manage and organize the activities and to serve as a conduit for resident views to the board and to management about things that need to be adjusted or changed. So it is also, along with having a lot of residents on the board and a lot of residents active in board committees, and in addition to having the open door policy with management, the council itself serves a specific role of transmitting to the board and management any other resident concerns that need to be considered. And I think that's a very important function of the council. The next slide shows you what all these 70 working committees are. They're probably not 70 on this list. This is a list that I'm not showing you all this detail because I expect there'll be a test at the end of our meeting today. But I just want you to, especially for those who are new, to get a sense of what the range of this committee process is. It covers all kinds of things, from entertainment to games to liaison. The liaison committees in the upper right-hand corner are those committees that have to work closely with staff in things like the dining room and so on, tech support and other sorts of things. There are just all kinds of things here and you just had a chance recently to express your own interest in working on these committees, and that is the list is enormous. I will tell you, as a newcomer, when I first got here a couple of years ago, I made the terrible mistake of you see in the entertainment list there are some entertainments on Friday and Saturday night, and I once talked to the person who was in charge of the Friday night event, and I said, "What movies are you showing tonight?" And she said, "We don't show movies on Friday night. We only show film." And so I said, "Well, sorry, I didn't realize that was a problem." So then I ran into the person who runs the Saturday night event, and I said, "What film are you showing on Saturday night?" And he said, "We don't show film on Saturday night. We only show movies." Well, I say that just to remind you that there are lots of different words here that have to be. It's a very serious business, and these people take their work seriously. Okay, the next slide. this is a list of the current members of the council and the particular jobs that they've been assigned. You will recognize a lot of these people as your friends and neighbors, and you see kind of how the work is spread out among the executive functions, the administrative functions, the program coordination functions, and then of course that wonderful institution we have which funds all these activities, run by Susan and Cami, the Monday Market. And so that's what the structure looks like. Incidentally, I should mention that part of the general openness of this whole process, this whole governance process, is reflected in the fact that you can go into the library, and on the east wall, you find a bunch of white 3-ring binders, and it has all this stuff in it, including the last minutes of the board meeting. And if you want to look to see what's going on in the way of board discussions of strategic planning, how we're going to function in the future, or the little closer in time activities they're concerned about, the master plan, the current remodeling being done in the building. Those are all discussed in the board minutes, and they're all available in these binders in the library. So educate yourself about what's going on. And one of the things I discovered the last time I looked at one of those binders, the board minutes for the February board meeting, they were hearing a report from the strategic planning people, and we're talking about how we're going to be sure that we can compete in the future, because it turns out that there are a lot of other people getting into the CCRC business in our area, and there will be more competition. And so it is important that we know what future residents may want. And one of the things that they discovered was that one of the attractions of Horizon House has always been its urban setting. And a lot of us, I'm sure it's true, Marianne and me, and with many of you, just love this. We like to go out to Emerald Heights and see the grass and the trees and all that stuff, but it is so nice being here where we can go sometimes by foot to theaters and museums and recitals and entertainment venues and all kinds of things right here close to us. And that was important. And the strategic planners are wondering, if that's going to be true in the future. Is downtown Seattle going to be as attractive and safe and comfortable a place as it has been in the past? And that there have been developments this year that have raised some questions about that. And so that's something that the board has to fret about. And it's really interesting. So take a look at those minutes. They're really kind of interesting. The group the new architects who are looking at the internal reconstructions going on right now are beginning to come up with some design features for these changes in the dining room and the bistro and various things. They haven't got any designs for us to look at yet, but we will get a chance to look at it when they get the designs. But they're trying to figure out who we are, what we're really like, what we really would find the best place to live. And they discovered that one of the things we like, they believe, is that we like home-like rather than hotel-like ambiance in the place. So, there are some places in town, Mirabella would be my favorite example of a beautiful hotel lobby that nobody's ever in. But that's not what the people here seem to want. We want a lobby that is open to people and available to everybody, and with a lot of business interchange, bumping into friends and all that sort of thing. So as they're thinking about any remodeling they're doing of the library or the lobby, that sort of thing will be clear in their view. So just inform yourself about what the board is doing. Look at those minutes, look at the reports of Mike that are also in those books, and you'll find a lot of information that shows you how thoroughly people are studying these important questions and how open it is to us. And we have the free opportunity to comment on all that stuff as it comes along. Okay, I think that's the end of my slides. I'm not sure. Is there another slide left? Questions. Good. I'll turn all these over to Ned, I think would be a good idea.
No fair.
I'm going to ask Risa and Jenny if they see any questions. We had one question on chat, which was, is there a way to know who attended this webinar? And I don't believe there is, but I said I would ask. Risa, are you there?
Yes, Ann. So I see we have about 5 people in our audience.
Oh, okay.
Besides us 5 panelists, and not very many watching on YouTube. So I would imagine most people are watching on HHTV.
Okay, so in answer to the question in chat, we will not know who's watching. And I may just add my experience. I haven't done a lot of these webinars, but every time I've done it, I've been surprised at the preference that our residents seem to have for other venues for watching it, either HHTV or YouTube. Anyway, I want to pause just for a minute to see if there's anybody out there who does have a question at this point. We'll hold it open for just a minute or two. And while we're doing that, I just want to thank Bill and Ned so much for making this so understandable and also so interesting. And I also want to say to the residents, you are our secret sauce, you know. It's this resident-driven environment which you make possible. And it is that quality of Horizon House which stands it alone of all the places we've looked at, know about, hear about. And it is that quality of this community that the board and the strategic planning committee are intending to hold inviolate, absolutely essential. No matter what direction we take or what happens to us, that will be protected. It works well for us. It defines our community. And I, for one, feel so privileged and honored to be on your board, to tell you the truth, and to have the opportunity to participate. And I'm also delighted to see those slides that showed how many other residents are participating at various levels in these interesting kinds of activities and opportunities. I think it's great. Okay, any questions from anyone? Risa and Jenny, thank you for your support for this webinar. And again, Bill and Ned, many, many thanks.
Thank you, Ann.
Sam has a raised hand. Sam, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Okay, is that better now?
Yes.
Okay, first I want to echo Ann's last sentiments about the strength and uniqueness of this place, and really did not know just exactly how fortunate and how lucky Mona and I were to have made this choice to live here until the issue that's really what I wanted to make a comment, a question about, and that had to do with this terrible year that we have been living through the pandemic. And I don't know how it came about exactly, and it doesn't matter, but it turns out, I think, that in effect, probably the safest place to live for the past year may have been Horizon House, with the combination of its present enlightened administration and the expert information and the experts that happened to live in Horizon House at the time. So the question arises that it's very clear now in the public space that's what's being discussed is that from beginning with variants to look at variants, variant versions of the present COVID bug through new pandemics, that new pandemics are likely sometime in our future, hopefully not immediate, but we have no control over that. And I wondered, and my question or the issue that I'd like to just call attention to is who would be responsible for ensuring that the residents have complete transparency about numbers of cases, deaths attributed of residents, residents and staff, of the full staff, of everyone who's in the building, attributed to the current, the virus or infectious state, the pandemic of the day, and be aware of, and we should know about what the tracking is, the identification, etc. Because the population changes in the with the passing of time, to try to put it tactfully. So, so in this discussion and in the previous one that took place earlier this week, I didn't hear any reference at all to the pandemic. And I would like to just say that I believe it needs attention, and needs attention now in terms of future planning. And that's the issue that I want to raise. Is it first the board, board of trustees, who's first responsible for like lighting the first candle or the flame, understanding it, or is it the responsibility of the resident council for doing it? I don't expect immediate answers, but I just feel that it's very important that it be high in the consciousness of all the people who run this place at various levels. Thank you for permitting my lengthy comment. Thank you.
Well, Sam, this is Bill Andersen. Can I, am I on air here? I can't tell from what I'm seeing on my screen. I can say this, that what we've experienced so far in terms of who's in charge of the pandemic stuff is that the Residents Council and the executive have been closeted daily, I'm sure, with details about this. And we get expressions from them and new sets of rules periodically. I guess we're due for a new set of rules now, given the relaxation at the governor's level. But I hope that you all saw the story in this morning's New York Times on page 1, above the fold even, a big story about how Seattle is one of the heroes in the country, because its restrictions have been a little more consistently applied than most other places. And the result has been the lowest rates of hospitalization and injury and death in the country. So I think we're in a good part of the country for all this sort of stuff. And I think we've had a very conservative attitude on the part of the folks who are making these rules for us. They've been very careful, very slow. Now, if Sam's question goes to the issue of how many numbers are actually presented in the reports, I'm not sure that we've done that as fully as possible, although they do sort of tell us each time how many staff members, how many residents have been affected. But it's not a very elaborate reporting system. But that's something that I think the council and Mike might give some thought to if there seems to be resident interest in more details about that. Thank you.
This is Ned. One additional comment that I would make as far as identifying residents. You can't do that because of privacy and health privacy concerns, so that identifying individuals who may be afflicted is banned, basically.
I think our experience this year has demonstrated the commitment to transparency that you were talking about. And also, just in support of what Bill just said, one of the first things Mike did was work to establish a health advisory group that included expertise, medical expertise, as well as resident input about how we were going to respond to the various requirements for our response. And I think that there is a commitment to that transparency that runs through and through. So Sam, I feel reasonably confident that would govern how we behave if there were future crises like this one.
Mhm.
And I received a comment from through an email, person that's watching on HHTV to say thank you.
Oh, thanks, Risa. Good to know. Well, again, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your attention. Those of you who are, however you're viewing us or hearing this, wish you well for today and hope you enjoy this wonderful weather. Bye now.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.